Hello everyone, 6 p.m. Dubai time. This is Ali Azzuddin from 4th Generation 4 Education. And as you can see, our audience are coming from all over. So we have people watching from Pakistan, Greece, Jordan, Lebanon. Continue to add where are you watching from. And let me introduce our panelists. So I'm going to start with James. James or Jihad for the Lebanese, because currently he is in Beirut. James Kawas is the co-founder and the CEO of Flip, an app that allows anyone to effortlessly sell their belongings. Jihad is on the list of Forbes 30 under 30, and he has been honored Young Entrepreneur of the Year in 2016 by Entrepreneur Magazine. And let me tell you one thing, when I used to teach grade 4, Jihad was one of the students that I taught for maybe 2 months, right? And I'm so happy to have you with us today. Scott, again, going back in time, we met for the first time 10 years ago in India, where you were working. And then Scott has worked in the education sector for almost 30 years now, and in school leadership for the last 17 years. He's from Australia, and currently he's based in Switzerland. His leadership experiences have ranged from academic program coordination and whole school campus leadership. He has taught across all grades, but has a special passion for early years and elementary years students. And finally, Ali. So we had a very interesting story and how our path crossed. Ali is currently the Director of Learning and Teaching at SEC International School in Qatar. And Ali is a passionate and creative educator from the UK. He's involved in school improvement, and he's an educational consultant and professional development leader for teacher and school leaders. And today we've been talking about emotional intelligence for the leader. We've been talking about a flexible timetable and flexible learning environment. We talked about learning communities. We talked about well-being of the teacher. We talked that each teacher is a leader, and we launched from Beirut, where maybe all the Lebanese are suffering, a new project in collaboration with the UNESCO for all the Arabic teachers. And I'm so happy to talk now about the leadership, and from a student perspective, can we teach the student leadership skills? So, James, a few years ago, you were on TED Talk and you talked about the schools, and you said that schools are not ready for us. And you mentioned 3 main problems: the waiting time, you mentioned the problem of assessment and the failure, and you mentioned the problem of not learning with others. And we are only in the same space, same time, and the people are with the same age range. So do you think we still have the same problem?
Interestingly, that video I made, I was still in school. I was kind of I was suffering a little bit. I wanted to work on my creative projects, but here I had to wake up and go to school and live this alternative life that just does not relate to me. I was already making money, working, happy with what I did, but I had to go through that. So perhaps the 3 points that I mentioned then were like from the frustration of the moment, right? All the waiting and all the, all the way, the actuality of the days. But what 6 years later, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on this. And, at the beginning, I was very interested in reforming education as a student who kind of had a career early on and so on. But what I discovered over these years is that, school by definition is behind, right? It's by definition, it's the definition of an institution to be behind the subjects and their dreams and their goals. So certainly school is never going to be ready for kids. It will be super not humble to say that. I think kids are very complex beings. I think as humanity, we are still struggling to create institutions for adults, which are much more predictable and much more reasonable. So it's very hard. It's a very hard task to build a institution that can actually catch up with kids that are way more complex and harder to predict.
Okay, so what do we need to introduce? What kind of changes we need to introduce in a school so they can meet the needs of the students and the learners of today?
So I think all discussions of improving the educational system, and I've had plenty, and I thought I knew how I was going to fix it. And I talked to many other people who also thought they knew how they're going to fix it, all well-intentioned. The problem is that these discussions end up in two places. Incremental changes, which is what most webinars are about, right? Incremental changes. This is a new way of teaching. This is an interesting way, like let's do it in groups, project-based learning, so on and so forth. Or completely illusional belief that this centralized system is going to ever really solve all our problems. It's quasi-communist idea that you can really take people to the school and it's going to solve all their problems. So I think that most discussions are there. That's where it happens. So I would like to get out of that and maybe touch on the problem is in the structural system itself, the incentive structure, right? So why do who does the school serve? It serves the parents. They are the people who pay, and in any place where the people pay, they're the customer. They are the ones who decide to leave the kid, take them out, so on and so forth. So they are the person we're selling to, and therefore, by definition, schools are going to be as delayed and behind as the parents are, which they are, right? Always, and that's why they send their kids to school. But then the school does the same thing, and then the kids are kind of lost in between. So when we talk about improving the educational system, I would love to talk about the purpose. Why is it really there? Not why what the teachers want. The teachers are in the system are very different things, by the way, right? It's almost always they're very different creatures. The system is there to take you to college, basically today, one way or another. And you try to make some fun things in the process and so on, but you need to go to college. And again, and I think that is the first place where things start breaking. I've always had the best teachers I've ever had were always this kind of melancholic characters, whereby they knew that these kids were stuck, and they knew that they were also stuck, and they were very creative and very emotionally invested in the kids, but they had to live in the system exactly as the kids were. And it was this kind of sad situation where they try to get the pieces of creativity everywhere they can in that system. So I think that incentive structure is the problem. College is a big problem, right? It's kind of it's in my opinion, most of it is scam-like in many places, especially at the cost, and that flows down to school. So school serves college, and college is corrupt. So that's the first problem I would say. I would say that schools, this is why I don't think of change when I think of school. I don't think we can change it. I don't think we can change it in a way that is impactful enough. What I've come to learn is that perhaps school has to be like this. Perhaps it has to be a place that doesn't fulfill kids, a place that feels like prison-ish to kids, because perhaps that's where kids can learn the importance of freedom. If that's where they kind of start thinking that I want to break a system. I think school prepares people very well for the world out there, a world that is ruled by governments that have armies, that have police, that can put you in jail, and so it does prepare people to that, and tells them, you have to dare to be different, and you have to suffer to be different and to get out of that. And I think maybe that's how it's supposed to be. So in many ways it can change, but at the core it's unclear how, unless the incentives of the college are gone and the parents are gone, how it's going to really change.
So a very interesting discussion, very interesting perspective. Maybe we need to break the whole system. And then the system currently is facing a big challenge, James, because of the COVID. And I'm sure you are following a little bit the news. Students are sitting at home, learning online. And let me just tell you one thing, that in Dubai, the student had the choice to stay at home or to go back to the school. And many students are still at home, and it's been at 12 months for them being at home, and I'm not sure they will be back to the school. Because I mentioned this in a webinar, and I said, what will make the student go back to the school if the school is a place where is not like improving and meeting their needs? So what is your message for the student now?
Look, before the message, I would want to touch on one thing. What's so sad about the COVID situation, what's good about the COVID situation is it basically, and by the way, big difference between school and the teachers. The teachers are like the students, stuck in the system. It's exposing the expensive scam that is going on with the whole educational system. The fact that people are paying tens of thousands of dollars in college for what could be Zoom calls and so on. Same thing for school. People were just paying the premium for exclusivity, basically. So that is great. I'm very happy that kids now understand, oh, I can learn everything on the internet. It's clear. Yes, you can. It's great. The problem is, the biggest thing I'm sorry about is recess. So recess is and speaking of leadership, right? You can't teach leadership, right? And it's so funny to teach leadership. It's actually very ironic if somebody just spends a minute thinking about it. Recess is school. Recess is where kids learn everything they learn in school. It's where they learn about other people, about love, about violence, about group dynamics, about leadership, about play, about everything, society. Everything happens in recess, all right? Recess is the most useful time in school, and it's the most unstructured and untouched by the system, right? And people and the proof is that the kids are so engaged in recess.
It's so hard. Time, but
shortest time. They're so engaged that it's so hard to take them out of that, push them into this classroom, and then have some educated person who just attended a webinar say, let's do some engaging schoolwork. I was engaged. I was fine. You know, you're causing the problem. So I'm sorry for recess. And I think that if schools understood the value of recess, they would use that to bring people back. Kids will come back to play. I have a lot of friends and kids that I know in Dubai, like my family. They want recess. They want to play. So if schools only in most useful class is recess, so they should use it for marketing. So recess, I think, is what I'm sad for with this COVID thing. Very, very sad for, because kids are losing all those skills, all of them. They're not learning them by engaging with others. So finally, your question, what is my message to students? My message is you're not a student of school, right? School is just where you happen to be. Your parents sent you there. You don't get to say much about that. You're not a student of school. And the cheesy thing is that you're a student of life, but what does that mean? No institution will ever give you a guarantee. They will pretend to give you guarantees. They will try to convince you that you're going to get a guarantee when you come study here. College is the same lie, government is the same lie. The only guarantees you can get is by pursuing what you like, which is your curiosity, which, by the way, is not hard to do, but it's more so, if you're lazy, you won't be able to do it, or if you rely on the system, you won't be able to do it. So seek your curiosity. Don't spend too much time blaming the system. It's very attractive to blame the system, but believe me, they don't know how to do any better. There are no evil people doing it. It's just like people really don't know how to do this thing. It's complicated. It's hard. Adults don't know anything. So generally, like, kids think they know everything and they decide to make it so bad. It's just like they don't know. No, they don't know. So and the one more thing is, don't assume that you lack the knowledge to do what adults do. That's the monopoly of adults is completely unbased, especially when you have access to the internet, to information. Go and do the things you want to do when you grow up now, because you can, and you'll be more forgiven if you make mistakes. You will have a head start. You'll have a lot of fun. So don't assume that you don't know something so you can't do it. Go and know a little bit of it, 10% of it, and do it. Throw yourself in it. You'll be able to achieve a lot. Forget about college majors. They give you names and words, graphic designer, engineer, stuff like this is all made up. This is not how it works. Don't think I'm going to become X and X being a major. It doesn't work like that. So again, follow your curiosity. And finally, respect the teachers. I think they're doing their best, and they suffer a little bit more than you do. And finally, try to make some friends. Really, it will pay off. That's basically, in a nutshell, how to survive school and how to make the best out of it, in my opinion.
So thank you for these ideas, James. And then playing, making friends, according to you, are key elements of the current system. Scott, from a principal perspective,
Yes.
What would you like to say or comment before we start with the questions based on James' perspective?
Completely.
I'm sure you agree on the recess thing.
Oh, yeah. I think 100% that the notion of the one thing that the kids missed through this whole COVID experience has been that urge to want to be with their friends and want to be back at school to be with their friends. And it's not during the lessons, it's during the recess times, it's during the break times. It's 100% that it hits the nail right on the head there. I absolutely agree with that. I think, we were very fortunate we have been very fortunate in Switzerland, I guess. In the last 12 months, we've only really been closed in terms of distance learning for 6 weeks out of the last 12 months. And that's because the epidemiologists have said, well, little kids, that they don't need to socially distance and all these sorts of things. Okay, fine, that's good. And that's all very well. That's great. From a principal's perspective, what that's meant is we've really had to look very, very closely at how we can keep the learning community from becoming a complete prison. And I'm being blunt in saying that when the state and the federal governments are saying, okay, the school stays open, but the kids can't play with a ball because that would mean sharing equipment. Or, if you're a 15-year-old, you've got to be socially distanced from your other friends. And so therefore, when you're eating in the cafeteria, you cannot talk. And as soon as you put your mask on, then you can talk. I mean, it's all these sorts of things that you're thinking, hang on a minute. As a principal of a school, my philosophy is always, if a child is happy, they're going to learn. Okay, they're going to learn, they're going to grow. Nothing else matters. If they're happy, they're going to learn. How on earth, as a leader, when you've got all these things coming in on you saying, we're going to keep the school closed and we're going to put all these restrictions around it. How on earth do you make the place a happy, comfortable place for those students? It's a huge question that we've had to contend with, and I would argue almost all leaders around the world in some way, shape or form, whether they've had their students in distance learning or not, have been in exactly the same sorts of situations. It's just their context is different.
So in an IB school, when we talk about students, we are talking about student agency.
Yeah.
And we are talking about choice, voice, and ownership.
Yeah.
Were you able to listen and to hear the student voice during this moment?
Oh, yeah. I want to take a step back, first of all, from that question, just to set a bit of a context. I think we need to shift our conversations around schools from the word schools to communities. And I know that sounds a little bit cheesy and all these sorts of things, but I really think we have to take a step back, because the minute that we talk school, communities start to think of academics and results and desks in rows and all these sorts of things. We need to pull back a bit, actually a lot, and we need to say, okay, schools are learning communities. And at the center of any good school, it doesn't matter how many swimming pools you've got, how many innovative programs you've got in your schools, how many kids you've got, how beautiful your buildings look. If the quality of the relationships in that building is not high, forget it. It's never going to work. So, and those relationships, parent to teacher, teacher to student, obviously, leadership, if those qualities, the quality of the relationships is not high, forget it. It's not going to be a real, true community. So coming back to your question, yes, absolutely. I think student voice in our context has really been those points throughout the last just over 12 months where the kids have said enough, and they've done it respectfully. You know, they have been incredibly resilient. They've been incredibly, you know, adaptable to everything that's gone on. And yet out of that has come, you know, the ideas from them around, okay, so if we can't play with equipment out in the playground, what can we do? And the classic case of this with the teenagers was, you know, they said, well, can we use our devices then? Can we use our phones and things like that? Oh, no, you can't do that. You know, there was a lot of community, oh, no, that means they're using their devices more when we were back at school. I said, hang on a minute. If they're in their break, as James said, if they are, you know, if that's their sacred time, if that's their time for them to socialize, why can't we give them something? And so we talked to them about, well, what would this look like if you wanted to use your devices to play games with each other across the room, all those sorts of things. What would that look like from your perspective? And we had to let go because there were all these fears around, well, the kids are going to be cyberbullying at break times, all these sorts of things. We just had to let go of it because at the end of the day, we had to ask ourselves, and the kids actually said this, well, if we're just going to be sitting in a table distance from our friends with these masks on, and you're expecting us to sit there after sitting in a classroom for 4 periods of 50 minutes and then go to lunch and all these sorts of things, how is that helping us to grow, to interact? Because all those break times, they are so important to them to, as James said, to argue, to learn about leadership, to learn about, you know, interacting with each other, all these sorts of things. So from you know, they've been incredibly creative in bringing their voice to leadership. And we've tried really, really hard to be as responsive as we can to them. We've said to them, at the end of the day, you know, this school can stay open for as long as we want. We've just got to all play our part in calling everybody to action and making sure we're wearing our masks and washing our hands. And if we feel unwell, go and see the front office and they'll call your parents, doing all these sorts of things in order to keep the school open. At the moment, there is a real collective voice in our school community around our grade 12s because they know our school has taken, for anybody that's in an IB school, they'll know that there's two paths you can take with the grade 12 exams. One is, you know, it's external. One is we have the exams. That's another conversation for me. Do I agree with them? Not so sure. But anyway, we've taken the exam path. And the positive part out of all of this has been the reaction of our students saying, you know, this isn't just about us following the rules and keeping our school safe and healthy. It's also about our grade 10, our grade 12s, because we know that they're trying really hard. We know that they're studying like we're studying. So they're advocating for their peers in those older grade levels, which I think has come from them. It hasn't come from us. So it really comes back to, how do you cultivate as a leader quality relationships of trust and balance? And from an adult's perspective, just let go a little bit, because these students, as James said, these kids, they're incredibly capable. We have to think about children as competent, not as incompetent that we need to fill up with all this wisdom. They are incredibly competent. And if you engage in conversations with them around solutions, you'd be surprised what they come out with.
Scott, like James mentioned also this whole idea of parents and what parents want from the school, and then they pay, and so it's a kind also of a business relationship. So if we want to change the school to a learning community, what are we doing to change also the parents' mindset?
I think, you know, this is a big question that we're asking ourselves at the moment at the International School of Bern. And I've put this out to the community and said, okay, people, community, adults, we need to stop for a minute and think about all of those dispositions, all of those behaviors and character traits that our students have had to draw upon in the last 12 months that we haven't taught from a textbook, that they've had to learn. And now we have forced them into these school structures. We've forced them into, you know, learning mathematics and individuals and societies and all these sorts of things. So be it. Parents are paying for this. Yes, they're on their pathways to universities and colleges. But how are we celebrating all of these dispositions that these kids have had to embrace? They've had no choice. I mean, we talk as adults about what we've had to embrace, but the last 12 months has almost etched into the very minds of our students this experience of having to be resilient, having to be independent, having to critically think about, so how do I navigate the communication with my teacher on this device, which I already know a lot about actually, but how do I communicate my expectations and how I'm feeling, all those sorts of things. What are we doing? Because they're the sorts of things you can't put into a report card. You can't put any of those sorts of disposition into a report card. So what are we doing to communicate and to celebrate that with our parent community? Of course, academics is always going to be important. And I'm not saying that learning dispositions need to be more important or less important. That's an ideal, that's a vision. But at this point in time, can we just talk about how those sorts of dispositions are of equal footing to knowledge, skills, concepts, and all these other things? What are we doing? Because there is the perfect opportunity now to ask ourselves, can we just stop and reflect on the last 12 months through the eyes of our children? Because they have grown tremendously in terms of all of these behaviors and character traits. And we need to have that conversation with our parent communities.
Thank you, Scott. I'm moving now to a different perspective, and I'm moving to Ali. And Ali, I know you are really involved in training the teachers. And so how we can also help the teacher and train them so they can teach these skills that we need them for the future and for the present, for this changing present.
A good question, Ali. When we think about training, not just only teachers, but also ourselves, it needs to start with us. It's always about practicing what we preach, right? So it needs to start from, rather than top above, it needs to be a collaborative process. Now, when it comes to training, there are so many ways to this. As an example, one way is agreeing on a philosophy or set of essential agreements for teaching leadership capabilities. We have to really start with modeling these capabilities or approaches ourselves and through our day-to-day actions, decisions, interactions. For example, a genuine act of kindness, dealing with difficult situations tactfully, because you have to remember that there are other people around you who are watching you. In the same way, I have students, my own nephews and nieces who watch me, my colleagues who watch me. So it's about how we really portray ourselves too. So for me, it's about, we need to embed relevant leadership research, literature, and make time for it as part of ongoing conversations and professional learning, not just only in a school environment, but in any organization, because it really is about creating a positive culture for this, where we can really get together to learn. As an example, one thing I remember doing in the past was working with a team of teachers and a senior leadership team, where we looked at the school's mission, its vision, its philosophy, and we basically got together and we came up with leadership attributes and traits that we wanted to develop and implement collectively. And these were intrinsically linked to the school's vision and mission. And this can also be applied to any organization or company. Very often in schools specifically, I have observed as a visitor or consultant where leadership teams don't actually talk about leadership. As part of ongoing professional learning, they don't talk or discuss about leadership approaches or styles. Who knows? Because they are perhaps too busy dealing with the pandemic right now, or prior to COVID, the day-to-day operation and politics of school. So we have to set time aside for this to train ourselves and to provide leadership training opportunities for teachers collectively. And time is important. I think as teachers and as leaders as well, that's something we always want, right? In life, we always ask for more time, and we always ask ourselves, gosh, I wish I had more time to do this and that. So that's another aspect for it. We have to really set the time aside for this in order to sit down, read, and reflect on what is going on well in our lives in terms of leadership, what is working well in a school or organization environment. And rather than thinking about improvement, for me, I find that quite negative. It should be about what can we do to grow and be successful as a team and as a human community. So I hope that answers that when it comes to teacher training.
I can see that you are also interacting with the attendees. So, but James, let me remind you and remind everyone, you need to put all panelists and attendees so everyone can read your answer in the chat, because now what you shared, it's only between us. So when you click on 2, And this is also a message for everyone. And I'm having a look at also the Facebook. So Samira, I'm going to pick your question, but later when I start doing the quick question. So Ali, my second question for you is, have you seen more leaders during this academic year from the teachers or from the students, especially during the teaching online, during the COVID situation? Have you seen any pattern regarding that topic we are discussing today?
I have seen both informal and leadership opportunities take place. For example, I have seen way more teacher leaders having to step up to challenges during this pandemic. I've seen more students step up, really. Quite often in our organization, we think that the head of school is the leader or the coordinator or the head of department, and that's simply just not true. Your true leaders are essentially your teachers, who are at the front of everything. After all, it's the teachers who run the schools, and they are at the front of everything, like I said. We often forget that teachers are the leaders, and they have a huge responsibility in raising the leaders of our present and future. I've seen more empowerment for teachers, specifically in my context here in Qatar, in the school where I work, and also through virtual school visits. And it's where we have allowed teachers to really use their voice, exercise their voice, and given them that environment for them to be agents for positive change and to provide support towards students, parents, and each other. I've seen my own students step up as leaders, where they've had to really lead their own families in challenging circumstances. For example, a student where they've had to really lead and look after their brothers and sisters because the parents were sick because of COVID. So this is where I've seen leadership surprisingly the most through our students, number one, and our teachers, where they've had to step up because no one knew that this was going to happen. I mean, rolling back to March this time last year, who knew? We didn't. I remember just hearing about COVID, and even I was quite, let's say, gullible in the sense that for some reason I thought, okay, it's not going to come here to Qatar. It's not going to happen to me. This is not going to happen to us. And how silly for me to think of that. We sometimes put ourselves in a bubble without realizing that there are so many possibilities. So yeah, I've definitely seen a lot more students step up as leaders, surprisingly, to me, to my colleagues and teachers. So that's something that's been very inspirational for me.
Thank you, Ali. So a quick rotation now with quick question, and then I'm going back to James, who was able to share his message to everyone. And James, in the previous session, we had a session called All Teachers Are Leaders. And then the speaker, she said, one step, know yourself. Second step, know the other. And then the third step, collaborate. What do you think about those three steps regarding growing as a leader?
Yeah, anything that is 3 steps and 3 A's and 3 R's doesn't work, right? So certainly, leadership is about being so deeply interested in something that you out-interest everybody else and you have to lead. It's not something you want to do. It's something that you're just the most interested person in the room, so you naturally lead, even though you suck at leading. I don't think any leader really is good at leading. The ones that succeed end up, we have books about them. But on what Ali said about teachers in particular, right? I truly think that it's the teachers that are stuck. It's the teachers that are struggling to be leaders because their bosses are giving them a hard time. And to be honest, just to be clear, kids understand the hierarchy in school. They understand the principal when he tells the other person, and the other person talks to the teacher, and the teacher is having a problem with the principal. They get it, and they know that. And I think that it's these political fights that prevent teachers from staying, especially the good ones. Like you, Ali, I'm guessing when you left, it's probably something that has to do with politics. It must have been something like that. Most of the good teachers I've met had to leave because of politics. Kids see that, Kids learn that. Unfortunately, they become that when they grow up. And so I think it's not about kids revolting and fixing the system. I think it's teachers saying, you know what, we don't want to stick with this crap. We don't want to just do this all our lives. We want to do something very meaningful. And that's the tough part. So I think
okay, thanks. Scott, I'm moving again with a new question coming from the people watching on Facebook. And I know that maybe James will not agree, but Samira is asking, can we develop those leadership skills in early years? And then the little ones who are 4 to 6 years old. So
undoubtedly. And that comes back to how we view the early child. That comes back to how we view the youngest child. As I alluded to it before when we were talking, Ali, we've got to think of students as children as competent. They're all competent. They're not incompetent, and it's our job to fill them with some sort of whatever this level of competency is. We have to move away from that. We have to shift our conversations with early years students. We have to shift that away from the idea that they're cute. We have to shift our ideas away from that. With all good intention as adults, we use those sorts of words to describe them. And the intention is fine. We always need to remember that they're even to us. We're talking to them. We're engaging in conversations with them. We're on their journey with them. And that's where you develop those leadership skills. It's the key there is the teacher and how they view the student. An example of this, we couldn't do it this year, but what we do at IS Bern is we have home visits at the very beginning of the school year for our early years students. And what happens there is the kids come to school for half a day, and then in the afternoon, the teacher, and if there's an assistant, the assistant, they go to visit the kids in their homes. And of course, we prep the parents up about this, and we say, look, this isn't to find out what's going on in your household. It's to say to the kids, okay, for the next significant number of years, you're going to be coming into a learning community, a learning world, and for the next 12 months, I'm going to be teaching you. So I want to find out about you. I want to find out about your passions and your world. The difference that makes to the teachers and the kids in terms of the respect and that level of respect and how the conversations happen as a result of that is massive. It really is. So I think in answer to Samira's question, early years teachers just need to and normally they're pretty good at this, actually. It's the teachers of the older grades that are kind of a little bit not. But early years teachers need to always remember you're talking to a competent human being, and talk to them in a way that they're not cute. Don't talk down to them, talk to them and have those conversations with them. And when they ask something, answer them with to try to get into their mind. Ask them, well, what makes you say that? Why? What makes you think that? How do you, ask them every day, how are you going? What's going on in your life? Do all those sorts of things, because that's going to build those relationships really, really strongly. And that is leadership capacity building in younger children, because they know, as James said, they know how it works at school. Even at that age, they know. So, if you're engaging with them in conversations around how they learn and how their learning environment looks and all those sorts of things, then they're gonna step up.
Okay, Scott. So I think Alavia shares the same perspective as James in the chat. We don't teach leadership, but we provide opportunities so the students show us this. And so Ali, with this pandemic, the priorities of the school also changed. So what do you think are the top 3 things that now we need to look at after all this year of teaching online and learning online? And then who knows what will happen next, especially that now many schools are preparing for the next academic year and we still don't know how it will look like.
Before I go into that, I want to go back to something that Scott said earlier about how we talk to our students, particularly in the early years. And it is something that I witnessed through an observation when I went to a school. And it was at the pre-K level, and the teacher was just very patronizing. And I remember the student saying, why are you talking to me like that? Like, speak to me properly. Like, you don't need to speak to me like a child. And I was just very interested that you mentioned that, Scott, and that memory came back to mind. So I thought to just share that sometimes that we have to really think about the context and who we're talking to as well in terms of our students. If we treat them in a way that really engages them, you're going to get a lot more from those students. Going back to what Ali just said in terms of this, the top things that need to be taught or developed as part of leadership skills, the top thing that comes to my mind right now is diplomacy as one of the first things that comes to my mind. Why? Because for diplomacy, we have to teach our students kindness. I'm repeating kindness again, intercultural awareness and understanding, positive working and diplomatic relationships are everything, you know. And Scott said this earlier about relationships, building a sense of community in a school environment. I want to go beyond that as well. I think that's applicable to any working environment, creating relationships and really creating a sense of community and think about how we connect with others. So that's number one. That's top thing number one that needs to be taught or developed is diplomacy skills. My number two would be for all schools, heads and teachers, as educators, we have to be responsible and accountable for teaching health and well-being habits with what we eat, how we think, how we deal with stress, work-life balance, academics, personal life, and this equates towards overall well-being. And this is linked to teaching mindfulness, isn't it? If this is a weak area for us or for individuals or for your colleagues, then we really need to get together and do something about it quickly and educate ourselves so we can teach our students to be well for the demands of everyday life, for the unforeseen future, which is changing each day. It really is about practicing what we preach. If we are socially, physically, and mentally unfit ourselves, there's no way we're going to be able to help or inspire people around us or our students for that matter. Lastly, number three, we need to really teach our students to love learning forever because that's the world we live in. If we stop learning or stop listening to others around us, essentially you stop growing. And that's number three for me in a nutshell.
Oops. Thank you, Ali. I'm going to start with the last round of question, and then I'm going to keep my last question for James to wrap it up with him. And I'm going to Scott now with a final question for you, Scott. I've heard many school principals saying, we're waiting for COVID to finish, so we go back to the old time. And Momita is also asking, like, do you think the school definition changed forever? So what is your perspective regarding this? So
okay, so I think if we go back as schools and institutions, that is a massive opportunity we have lost. And I believe that I believe that 100%, 110%, if that was possible, because I think we need to, you know, like I said earlier on, we need to learn how important dispositions and character traits are of equal importance to everything else we teach in school. We need to look at the way we communicate in schools. As Ali said, we need to look at the importance of well-being and this notion of self-care. I think, Ali, you touched on something really important there. Self-care is not manicures and bubble baths and massages. It is not about that. It is about, you know, getting the right amount of sleep. It's about talking to our kids around that. It's about talking to our kids around, you know, good nutrition and having conversations around those sorts of things. We need to really build those sorts of things into our curriculum. If we go back and if we continue to talk in that way about going back, something's very wrong with that picture of the future that we're trying to build in education.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
It goes back to, I'll quickly just drop in there, build on what Scott just said. It really goes back to thinking about, gosh, what matters in life? You know, I think you have to really take ourselves, well, we have to take ourselves out of that box, you know, going back to what James said as well, it's something quite systematic, not just in one country, but many countries. We are put into complacent boxes. So we are taught to sit in a certain way. We are taught to do things a certain way, to prepare for a 9 to 5 job or an 8 to 5 job if you're from the UK, you know, where I come from. And really, we're not providing those opportunities to grow and to allow our kids to grow as well. The possibilities that are there. For example, being in school and saying, all right, we're doing X, Y, and Z because we want to get you to university. Well, there are some kids out there who don't want to go to university. They want to become entrepreneurs. They want to do something else. And do schools really cultivate that culture for opportunities outside of what we call the box?
So Ali, your final question is, tell me one thing that you are doing differently in your school during the pandemic.
One thing, just really taking a step back, truthfully, and reflecting on the context, the area, and really tuning in, listening. Now, I always say to people, communication really is the key, but really generally listening to each and every individual. Everyone has a story to tell. Everyone has their own circumstances. And you really have to, I don't want to use the word lenient. I want to say more considerate, way more considerate. Even before the pandemic, it's quite sad that we've had to have this pandemic to realize certain things. Oh, we need to think about well-being now. We need to think about looking after ourselves and each other. Really, we need a pandemic just to just to wake up to this. And these are things that should have been in place beforehand. We're human beings, and this whole idea about schools. I still keep seeing articles and people talk about, oh my gosh, kids have lost out on education. Really, have they? No, they're not. No, they're not. We're losing out on ourselves because we are not adapting. People are not adapting to the current circumstance or situation. So that's something that I've taken away from it, that you have to really take a step back. I've learned to step back and to tune in deeply and listen to everyone, look at what their circumstances are, so I can really not only support myself, but support the people who I'm around, students, parents, colleagues, family members, and really think about what matters the most, rather than trying to, shove a load of exams or content down students' throat, So it's about really being able to adapt and understand, being far more understanding than we need to be.
Thank you, Ali. James, your final question. And I can see again a lot of interaction during the chat and a lot of messages saying this is very interesting. I'm so happy to hear this, especially for the people who've been with me for the whole day. So it's not easy. James, when we started or before we go live, I told you, where are you now? And you said in Lebanon. And so Lebanon, I think, is facing a big crisis in leadership. And so if you want to send a message for all the Lebanese people watching us, or all the Lebanese teachers and your teachers who are also watching, or even maybe students who are watching us, what would be an inspiring message from you to them?
Not an inspiring message. I think it's what I'm doing. And what I'm doing is, and hopefully if there's some of the teachers who teach in Lebanon, look, the kids are surrounded by parents who have surrendered their rights years ago, right? Many years ago, they surrendered their rights, and they're being told that Lebanon is not a good place now, and that you have to leave, and like, look how everybody left. And the truth is, it's a problematic country for sure, but this is a time of truth, and we need to make it clear that change is suffering. Change is not fun. Change comes when people get poor, when people are unhappy, when all the lies we've been told are shown to be lies. I think this is the most true time of being a Lebanese. I lived through what, 15 years of being in a complete, made up Lebanon that does not reflect the real Lebanon. I think the Lebanon I see today is more real. I think the kids and the students need to know that this is not all bad. This is not we're done. This is, we get to start from zero, and we get to think for ourselves. And no one wants to do that. No one wants to think for themselves. No one knows how to do that. And I think when everybody says something, and when everybody agrees on something, it must be wrong. When everybody says that Lebanon is bad, when everybody's leaving, when everybody says this is not going to be fixed, well, there's a good chance they're wrong. And so when everybody's leaving, I decided to come back. partially because I think any person who's from any Lebanese who's an expat who has who had the chance to be able to earn a certain income in a certain currency should come back and should spend it here. People need it more here, and I think it's actually a very real time to be here. It's very sad. It's very unsettling, but it's real. If you want to be a Lebanese in Lebanon now, not in 2010 when it was a bubble. So that's my point, and I would use this point, which is being an example, to say to the teachers, particularly here, and please take that from me with like you know, a grain of salt. It's just me giving what I have learned as a student. I never felt that there was teaching. I've always just felt that there was teachers. There's just teachers. There's no teaching. The teaching process is almost irrelevant. There are personalities that teach kids how to be like them, not like what they're saying or what like them. And those teachers, and they are the creative teachers, the Mr. Kipling teachers, that type of teacher. Those are the teachers who were willing and risking being fired every single day. A teacher who is not willing to take the risk of being fired has nothing to teach kids. And that's a very tough thing to say. I'm a teacher, I want to earn a living, I don't want to get fired. But the truth is, unless the teacher is deciding to be a unique person and deciding to lead with what they believe in, risking a clash with the principles and with the policy, they have nothing to teach kids. And those who do, they teach kids without saying any words, and kids remember them, and kids want to become like them. And I think it's about having the guts. You can't teach leadership if you are not taking risk. Leadership is about taking risk. So show kids how you take risk, which means do things that the parents don't like, do things that the principals and the policy makers in the school don't like, and you might just be teaching the kids leadership. So that's my 2 cents.
This is so beautiful to wrap it up with. So I think Scott and Ali agrees, and it was a pleasure having the three of you to wrap up the day. Ali, you're always here, so I feel you belongs to 4 generations. Scott, it was a great conversation.
Always.
And then James, thank you for your time, for being with us. I really enjoyed this discussion. And then, as you can see in the chat, a lot of thanks and positive feedback. I'm going to wrap it up here, and I'm going to tell everyone I will see you next month. Stay tuned. The day will be around inquiry and with a lot of idea, a lot of speakers, and this time will be from teachers to teachers. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.